Our text for today picks up in the stream of the last two Gospels we've listened to. We've heard that Jesus sent the disciples out and that they were the ones who were announcing that people should turn around, and they were driving out demons, and they were anointing with oil many ill people and healing them. And then our text is interrupted by the story of John the Baptist and his beheading, and then it's picked up again. So it begins with these ominous tones. Watch out, because remember what happened to that other guy who preached that people should turn around, as the disciples have just done. And then our story begins this way. And those who'd been sent out returned, and they reported to Jesus all that they had done and that they'd taught. And Jesus said to them, let's go off privately to a deserted place and rest a while. Because so many people were coming and going, they didn't even have time to eat bread. So they got into a boat and then went off privately to a deserted place. And people saw them and recognized them and ran there on foot and got there ahead of them. So that when Jesus got out of the boat, he saw the crowd. And he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach the word to them at length. Then the story skips through the feeding of the 5,000 and the walking on water story. And then it picks up here. And Jesus came to Gennesaret and docked. People recognized him and began to bring their sick onto mats wherever he was. And wherever he went, in the cities or the villages or field, people would place their sick in the marketplace and plead with him that they might touch just the fringe of his garment. And as many as touched it were restored. So this story clearly has a lot to do with healing. I think it's the way the lectionary has chopped it up, it's a little tricky to hear the messages that are in it. But we do see that Jesus is desiring his disciples to have a break, to rest, something he himself seeks at times. But notice, before you preach on the fact that Jesus calls us to time apart, that he is never successful in setting out to do this. Every time he goes to a place to be alone or brings the disciples to a quiet place, there's an interruption. And ministry happens then in the midst of that interruption. I think Jesus really does have a plan. He really is seeking to have his disciples encounter some rest. And so when he looks up, getting out of the boat, curses, foiled again. He sees the crowd. He knows that the disciples just need some rest, and yet he gets ready to attend to them. He's like what? Like sheep without a shepherd, the narrator improvises. Then there's the feeding of the 5,000, the walking on the sea, and then there's the story in Gennesaret. And my sense of the story in Gennesaret is this. Throughout the Gospels, you see these zoom in and close up on amazing things that Jesus is doing. Right? So we see him drive a demon out of a man in the synagogue. We see him raising up Peter's mother-in-law and freeing her up for service. We see him touching a leper and restoring him to community. We see a paralyzed man who suddenly rises and can walk. We see the bleeding woman and Jairus' dead daughter as they are restored to life and live. So you have these wonderful stories where characters become visible and we enter for a brief moment into their lives, into their story. But Mark can't tell you every story that Jesus has about healing another person. And so he shows that these brief glimpses you have of a dozen healings in the Gospel of Mark are simply the tip of the iceberg. And that Jesus is constantly healing these whose names we don't know, their stories, we don't even know what they're ailing from. But we see the power of Jesus. And it kind of picks up on some of those images from earlier stories, particularly I think of the bleeding woman that we looked at a couple weeks ago. That they reach out and touching just the fringe of his garment, they're restored. So it invokes all the emotions in that earlier story and fills them up. I imagine our life in church is like that. Occasionally we get to hear the stories of this person or that one or that one. But as we listen to those stories of Jesus, we need to know that Jesus is active and alive in the lives of all our members, including those whose stories may never be lifted up in the assembly's presence. This story reminds us Jesus is always up to way more than we're aware of. Good luck as you preach on this story.